The clinic's fluorescent lights had been buzzing a death rattle for the better part of an hour, but I barely noticed. I was too busy memorizing the grain of the cheap laminate counter where the receptionist had told me to wait, because the doctor was running late. It was the kind of delay that made you think about everything you hadn't said yet, all the conversations you'd put off, all the small, unspoken apologies that now felt like they had a ticking clock attached to them. A bone scan. The words still rattled around in my skull. Just routine, my primary care doctor had said. For a woman my age. But routine didn't explain the leaden weight in my stomach as I finally pushed through the clinic's glass doors and stepped into the gray afternoon. The air outside was heavy, thick with the promise of rain. I tugged my coat tighter and fumbled in my purse for my keys, my fingers numb from the cold and the anxiety. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my old sedan and a single, pristine SUV parked in the spot reserved for the clinic's director. I was halfway to my car, my mind already running through the list of groceries I needed to pick up, the phone call I had to make to my sister, the way I was going to break the news to Mark, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, squinting at the screen. A text from Mark. My son. The one who still called me Mom, with a warmth that made up for every sleepless night and every dollar I'd scraped together to put him through college. I smiled, a brief flicker of relief in an otherwise heavy day. He was probably checking in on me, just like I'd raised him to do. I tapped the message opened at asterisk so long. I cleared all your goods. Asterisk, my feet stopped moving. The sound of a distant car horn faded into a dull hum. I read the words again, slower this time, as if the letters themselves would rearrange into something less brutal. They didn't. They just sat there, cold and final, a severed head in a digital envelope. I replayed the last conversation we'd had. It was 3 days ago. I'd called him to talk about his upcoming wedding, to offer to host the rehearsal dinner at my house, the way my mother had hosted mine. He'd been short, distracted, mumbling something about Sarah's mother having already booked a venue. I'd let it slide. I was always letting things slide with Mark. It was easier than rocking the boat. Easier than admitting that the boy who used to hold my hand on the first day of school had grown into a man who treated me like a distant, slightly inconvenient relative. But this was not an inconvenience. This was an annihilation that I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the call button. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted him to tell me it was a prank, a misunderstanding, that he'd been hacked. Anything but the cold, unyielding reality of those 5 words. My thumb pressed down, the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then went to voicemail. His recorded voice, the one I'd heard 100 times, cheerful and brisk, told me to leave a message. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? Asterisk, hey, honey. Just checking. Did you really ransack my entire life and dump it in a landfill? Asterisk, I hung up. The silence was louder than the buzzing clinic lights had ever been. My legs carried me to the car on autopilot. I got in, closed the door, and just sat there, the phone still clutched in my hand like a dead thing. The steering wheel was cold under my knuckles. I pictured my house, my living room, the Pottery Barn coffee table I'd saved up for 2 years to buy, the photo albums on the shelf below it, chronicling every stage of Mark's life, from his first wobbly steps to his graduation cap and gown. The porcelain rooster for my grandmother, a ridiculous, ugly thing that I'd always promised to leave to him. All of it. Cleared. What did that even mean, cleared? Sold, thrown away, donated to Goodwill. The thought of strangers pawing through my underwear drawer, flipping through my wedding album, touching the faded silk of my mother's wedding dress, made bile rise in my throat. I started the car. The engine coughed, then roared to life. I pulled out of the clinic parking lot, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The drive home was a blur of red lights and turn signals, a disjointed slideshow of my life, playing out in reverse. I remembered the day Mark moved out. He was 22, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his girlfriend Sarah waiting in a Honda Civic that stank of cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. He'd hugged me, a quick, perfunctory squeeze. I'll call you, Mom. And he had. Sometimes. When he needed something. But the house had been a constant. The one thing I could count on. The four walls that held the echoes of my husband's laugh, my son's childhood, my own youth, all of it steeped into the walls like a stubborn stain. I'd poured every spare dime into that house. I'd refinanced it twice, taken on a second mortgage to pay for Mark's law school tuition. A decision I'd never regretted, not once, because that's what you did for your kid. You sacrificed. You bled. You gave, and gave until there was nothing left to give. And now he'd taken the house. Toot, I turned onto my street, the familiar sight of the oak trees lining the sidewalk offering no comfort. I was halfway to my driveway when I saw the truck. It was a massive, white-moving truck, the kind with the big, blocky letters that read, "Affordable Moving Solutions" on the side. It was parked directly in front of my house. My house. The one I'd lived in for 30 years. The one I'd raised my son in. The one that was supposed to be my haven, my sanctuary, my final resting place. I slammed on the brakes, the car jerking to a stop. The truck was there, but the men weren't. They were gone, their job done. The back of the truck was closed, sealed up tight with a heavy padlock. All my things were in there. My grandmother's piano, the one that had been too heavy to move when my husband had first bought it. My china cabinet, the one I'd spent 3 weeks stripping and restaining. My bed, the mattress where I'd lain next to my dying husband, holding his hand while he slipped away. All of it, gone. I got out of the car, my legs trembling. I walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. It was ajar, just a crack, but that was enough. I pushed it open. The house was empty. Not just tidy. Not just rearranged. Empty. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. The living room floor was scratched where the sofa had been dragged out. The walls were covered in faint, dirty rectangles where the paintings had hung. The carpet was indented, still holding the ghost of a coffee table that had been there for decades. I walked through the rooms like a stranger, my footsteps echoing off the bare walls. The kitchen was stripped, the cabinets gaping open like hungry mouths. The pantry was bare, not even a stray can of soup to remind me of all the dinners I'd cooked for Mark and his father. My bedroom was the worst. The walk-in closet, once a jumble of clothes and shoes and boxes of old photographs, was empty. The closet rod was still there, but nothing hung on it. A single hanger swung back and forth, a lonely pendulum marking the death of my life. I sank onto the floor of my empty bedroom, my back against the wall. The tears came, hot and silent. I didn't even have a tissue to wipe them away. They were all in the truck. I laughed, a choked, broken sound, because what else was there to do? I had been erased. My son had scrubbed me from existence like a chalkboard after the lesson was over. That's when I saw the envelope. It was taped to the wall where my dresser used to be, a plain white rectangle with my name written across the front in Mark's sharp, impatient handwriting. I crawled over to it, my knees aching against the hardwood floor. I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a legal document, a letter from a real estate attorney. I scanned the words, my vision blurring with tears. It was a notice, an eviction notice, dated 3 days ago, the same day I'd called him about the rehearsal dinner. He'd already had this drafted. He'd been planning it for weeks. The letter explained it plainly in cold legal terms. The house, it said, was not entirely mine. When my husband died, he'd left a clause in his will, a side agreement, the attorney called it, that stipulated the house would be held in a trust. The trust was to be managed by my son, Mark. And Mark, in his role as the executor of the trust, had decided to liquidate the assets. He had the right to do so, the letter explained. The law was on his side. I read the letter 3 times, my mind refusing to accept it. My husband had never told me about any trust. We'd built that house together, scraped together the down payment, painted every room ourselves. It was ours. It was mine. But the paper in my hand said otherwise, and there, at the bottom, in a final, crushing paragraph, was the real reason for all of this. The proceeds from the sale of the property, after all debts and fees are settled, are to be used for the wedding of Mark and Sarah, as per the written wishes of the deceased. It is further stipulated that no funds shall be released to the primary resident Eleanor, as she is a named beneficiary in the trust's secondary clause, which only activates upon the completion of the wedding. Asterisk. I stared at the words, my mind going blank. He needed the money for the wedding. Sarah's mother, with her $1 million house and her perfect, polished life, had demanded a wedding that cost more than I could make in a lifetime. And Mark, my Mark, had decided to take it from me. The letter fluttered from my fingers, landing face up on the floor. The silence of the empty house pressed in on me. And then, from downstairs, I heard it. The sound of the front door creaking open, followed by the click of expensive heels on the wood floor. A woman's voice, smooth and familiar, called up the stairs. Eleanor, I'm sorry to just drop in, but I saw the truck. I thought you might need some company. Amelia, my sister-in-law, the one who'd always looked at me with pity in her eyes, like I was a child who'd made a mess of things. The one who had never let me forget that she was the younger, smarter, richer one. That I scrambled to my feet, my hands trembling. I didn't trust myself to speak. Amelia's heels clicked closer, and then she appeared in the doorway, her sharp, elegant silhouette silhouetted against the dim light from the hall. She was holding a manila folder under her arm, a sleek, professional thing that looked like it had been through a dozen boardrooms. I'm so sorry about all of this, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I know it must be a shock, but I think there's something else you need to see. She held out the folder. It's the original trust agreement. Mark's father, my brother, he was very specific about the terms. He wanted to make sure Mark was taken care of, you know.
He always worried about you.
He thought you'd spend the money on frivolous things. I took the folder, my hands numb. The words were a blur, but one sentence caught my attention. It was a separate page, tucked into the back, handwritten in my husband's familiar, slanted script. If Eleanor contests the trust, or attempts to prevent the wedding in any way, she shall forfeit all rights to the secondary inheritance clause and be entitled to nothing. I would get nothing. I looked up at Amelia, my vision swimming with tears. She was watching me carefully, a tiny smile playing at the corner of her lips. There's more, she said softly. Mark has already listed the house. He's got a buyer, a developer. They're going to tear it down and build condos. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense.
The house.
My house.
Torn down.
The wedding's in 3 months, Eleanor. Amelia continued, her voice a soft, deadly purr. And you have a choice. You can fight this, make a scene, drag everyone through the mud. But you'll lose. Or. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. You can let go. Walk away. Start fresh. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to me. It was for a retirement community, a nice-looking place with a photo of a smiling couple walking through a flower garden. I've taken the liberty of reserving a unit for you. It's small, but it's clean. And it's already paid for. Mark wanted to make sure you were taken care of, you know, in his own way. I stared at the card. The colors were too bright, the smiles too wide. It was a gilded cage. A pretty little prison where I could rot away, out of sight. And out of mind. Amelia's smile widened. So, what do you say? Eleanor, are you ready to let the past go? Amelia's business card felt like a live grenade in my palm. The glossy image of the retirement community, with its manicured gardens and smiling, silver-haired couples, seemed to mock me. I looked from the card to Amelia's expectant face, and something inside me snapped. Not a dramatic, screaming break, but a quiet, cold fracture. The kind that happens deep underground, long before the earthquake hits the surface. No, I said. Amelia's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. No, Eleanor, I really think you should consider. I said no. My voice was steadier than I expected. I dropped the card on the bare floor, watching it flutter down like a dead leaf. I'm not going to some retirement home so you and Mark can pretend I never existed. This is my house. I've lived here for 30 years. I raised my son in this house. I buried my husband from this house. And I'm not leaving without a fight. Amelia's expression shifted, the mask of sympathy slipping to reveal something harder underneath. A flicker of irritation, maybe even contempt. Eleanor, I'm trying to help you. The legal documents are clear. You don't have a leg to stand on. If you try to contest this, you'll burn through whatever money you have left on lawyers, and you'll still lose. Mark has the best attorneys money can buy. Sarah's father is a partner at one of the biggest firms in the city. Do you really think you can win against all of them? I didn't answer. I just stood there, my feet planted on the scratched hardwood floor, my hands shaking at my sides. I thought about Mark as a little boy, the way he used to run into my arms after a nightmare, his small body trembling with fear. I thought about the way I'd stayed up all night with him when he had the flu, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth, singing him lullabies until his fever broke. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every penny I'd pinched, every sleepless night I'd endured, all for him. And now he was trying to erase me. Amelia sighed, a theatrical sound of exasperation. I really hoped you'd be reasonable about this, Eleanor. But I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You always were stubborn. It's what my brother loved about you. And it's what ultimately drove him crazy. I flinched. She knew exactly where to strike. My husband, Richard, and I had had our share of arguments. He was a pragmatist, a man who believed in order and logic. I was the dreamer, the one who wanted to hold on to things, to memories, to moments. We'd fought about money, about parenting, about the future. But we'd always found our way back to each other. Or so I'd thought. Richard loved me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
He wouldn't have done this.
He wouldn't have hidden a trust from me, wouldn't have left me with nothing. Amelia's eyes narrowed. You don't know everything about Richard, Eleanor. You never did. There were things he kept from you. Things I knew about because he trusted me. He trusted me more than he trusted you in the end. The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my hand reaching out to brace myself against the wall. What are you talking about? Amelia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a woman who'd been waiting years to deliver the final blow. The trust was his idea, Eleanor. He set it up 2 years before he died. He was worried about you, about your spending habits, your inability to let go of the past. He wanted to make sure Mark would be taken care of, that he wouldn't be burdened by your choices. She paused, letting the words sink in. And he wanted to make sure that if you ever tried to sabotage Mark's future, you wouldn't be able to. He knew you, Eleanor. He knew you'd try to hold on too tightly. He was protecting his son. From you. I felt the air leave my lungs. My husband. The man I'd loved for 35 years. The man I'd nursed through his final, agonizing months of cancer. He'd set this up behind my back. He'd made me a stranger in my own life. You're lying, I said, but the words sounded hollow. Even to my own ears. Amelia reached into her folder and pulled out another document, this one with a folded edge and yellowed, aged paper. She held it out to me. Read it yourself. It's a letter he wrote, addressed to you. He asked me to deliver it only if it became necessary. I think it's necessary now. I took the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. Richard's familiar, cramped script, the same handwriting that had graced every birthday card, every anniversary note, every little love letter he'd slipped under my pillow. I unfolded it slowly, the paper crackling with age. Asterisk, my dearest Eleanor. Asterisk, asterisk, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and things have come to a difficult pass. I know you'll be angry, maybe even heartbroken, and I'm sorry for that. But I've always believed that love means making hard choices, even when they hurt. I've set up the trust to protect Mark. He's young, and he has so much potential. He needs a solid foundation, and I'm afraid you don't always see the world as clearly as I do. You have a beautiful heart, Eleanor, but it's also a reckless one. You give too much, you sacrifice too much, and you forget to think about the future. Asterisk. Asterisk, I hope you'll understand in time that this was the right thing to do. I hope you'll find peace. And I hope you'll let go. For Mark's sake, and for your own. Asterisk, asterisk, forever yours, Richard. Asterisk, I read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words cut deeper. My husband, the man who'd held my hand on our wedding day, who'd wept when our son was born, who'd whispered his love to me on his deathbed, had seen me as a liability. A reckless, Sentimental fool who couldn't be trusted with her own family's future. The letter slipped from my fingers, landing on the floor next to Amelia's business card. I stared at them, two pieces of paper that had just demolished my entire understanding of my life. Amelia watched me, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. I know it's a lot to take in, but I think you can see now that fighting this is pointless. Richard made his wishes clear. Mark is simply carrying them out. The wedding is going to happen, Eleanor. And you need to decide whether you want to be a part of it or whether you want to be left behind. I looked up at her, my vision blurry with tears. You knew all of this. You knew about the trust, about the letter. You knew what Richard planned. And you never said a word to me. Not when he was dying. Not when I was grieving. Not when I was pouring every penny I had into keeping this house afloat. Amelia's smile was thin and brittle. Richard asked me to keep his confidence. I honored his wishes. That's what family does, Eleanor. We honor each other's wishes, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts. I felt a cold, hard knot forming in my chest. It was the anger I'd been suppressing for years, the resentment I'd buried deep under my love for my son, my husband, my family. It was the realization that I'd been a pawn in their game, a piece on a board I didn't even know existed. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Amelia blinked. Excuse me, I said, get out. I straightened up, wiping my face with the back of my hand. Take your folder and your letter and your retirement home card and get out of my house. This house, Amelia. Not Mark's. Not Richard's.
Mine.
I may not have a legal claim to it, but I have a claim to it in every way that matters. And you are not welcome here. Amelia's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Eleanor. A big one. Mark is going to. I don't care what Mark is going to do. My voice rose, cracking at the edges. I don't care about the trust or the will or any of it. This is my home. And I'm not leaving. Not until I've had my say. Not until I've talked to my son face to face. Not until I understand why he would do this to me. Why Richard would do this to me. Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. Get out. Now. She stood there for a long moment, her eyes boring into mine. Then she bent down, picked up her folder and the fallen business card, and turned on her heel. Her heels clicked across the empty floor, each step a sharp, precise punctuation mark. She paused at the door, her back still to me. You always were a fool, Eleanor. A sentimental, foolish woman who couldn't see what was right in front of her. Mark is going to get what he wants, one way or another. And when he does, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. She walked out, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft, final click. I stood in the middle of my empty house, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. The silence was deafening. I looked around at the bare walls, the empty rooms, the ghost of my life. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. That determination. That I walked to the kitchen, the only room in the house that still had a hint of life in it. The faint outline of the refrigerator on the linoleum floor, the ghost of the stove against the wall. I opened the cabinet under the sink, the one I'd always used to store cleaning supplies. It was empty, but I remembered something. A small gap in the back, a loose board I discovered years ago when I was fixing a leaky pipe. I'd never told Richard about it. It was my little secret, a hiding place for the emergency cash I'd stashed away. I knelt down, my knees protesting against the cold floor. I pried the loose board free with my fingernails, my heart pounding. My fingers brushed against something. A small, metal lockbox. The one I'd bought after Richard died. The one I'd filled with the things I couldn't bear to lose. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. The lock was still intact, the combination still set to my birthday. I spun the dial, the familiar clicks a small comfort. I opened the box. Inside was a stack of papers, carefully folded and preserved. Birth certificates. Marriage licenses. My husband's death certificate. And a folder I'd almost forgotten about, one I'd shoved in there in a fit of grief and never opened again. A folder labeled medical records. I opened it. Inside were copies of Richard's medical files, the ones I'd requested from the hospital after he died. I'd been too overwhelmed to read them at the time, too consumed by grief to process the clinical details of his final months. But now, in the cold, empty shell of my house, I forced myself to look. The pages were dense, full of medical jargon I barely understood. But one line caught my eye. A note from his oncologist, dated 6 months before Richard died. A * patient has expressed significant concern regarding financial burden of treatment and potential impact on family assets. Recommended consultation with a state attorney to explore protective measures, *. Protective measures. The trust. Richard had started planning all of this while he was still alive, while he was still holding my hand, still kissing my forehead, still telling me he loved me. He hadn't just been worried about his cancer. He'd been worried about his legacy. About Mark. About making sure I didn't mess things up. That I sat back on my heels, the papers spread out around me. The anger I'd been holding onto was still there, a hot, burning coal in my chest. But underneath it, something else was starting to form. A plan. A desperate, crazy, probably doomed plan. I pulled out my phone and called my sister, Margaret. She lived 3 states away, but she was the only person I trusted. The only person who would tell me the truth, even when it hurt. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor, it's late. What's wrong? I took a deep breath. Margaret, I need your help. Mark has taken everything. The house, the furniture, everything. He's evicted me. And I just found out Richard set up a trust behind my back to make sure I can't fight it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Margaret's voice, sharp and hard as steel. That son of a bitch. I always knew he was a snake. What do you need? I closed my eyes, the tears threatening to spill over again. I need a lawyer. A good one. Someone who'll fight for me. Not just take my money and tell me to give up. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I know someone. She's a pit bull, Eleanor. Mean as a junkyard dog. She got my neighbor's husband full custody of his kids when everyone said he didn't stand a chance. I'll text you her number. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said. You've got a fight on your hands, and I have a feeling it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. She was right. I could feel it in my bones. The storm was coming. That night, I slept in the empty house on the floor of my bedroom, wrapped in a single blanket I'd found in the back of my car. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creak of the house settling and the distant sound of traffic. I thought about Mark, about the little boy who used to curl up in my lap and tell me he loved me more than anything in the world. I thought about Richard, the man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with. I thought about Amelia, her sharp smile and her hidden knives. And I thought about the fight ahead. The fight for my home, my legacy, my life. I didn't sleep much. But when the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtainless windows, I was already awake. Already planning. Already readied. I had a lawyer to call, a son to confront, and a family to reclaim. One way or another, I was going to make them see. I wasn't a liability. I wasn't a fool. I was Eleanor Morgan, and I was just getting started. The phone in my hand felt heavier than it should. I pulled up Margaret's text, the name and number of the lawyer glowing on the screen. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the call button. And then, from outside, I heard the rumble of an engine. A familiar engine. Mark's car. The sleek, black sedan he'd bought with the money from his first big law firm bonus. I looked out the window, my heart pounding. Mark was getting out of the car, his suit crisp, his face set in a hard, determined line. He wasn't alone. Sarah was with him, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder. They were walking toward the house, their faces masks of grim purpose. This was it. The confrontation I'd been dreading and craving in equal measure. I set the phone down on the floor, rose to my feet, and walked to the front door. I opened it before they could knock, standing in the doorway like a sentinel. My son and his future wife stared at me, their expressions flickering with surprise. Eleanor, Mark said, his voice cold and formal. We need to talk. No, I said, my voice steady. You need to listen. And I stepped aside, letting them into the empty house. The house that had once been our home. The house that was now a battlefield. And Mark stepped through the doorway like he owned the place. Which, according to the legal documents, I supposed he did. His eyes swept over the empty living room, the bare walls, the ghostly outlines on the floor where furniture had once stood. There was no flicker of remorse in his gaze.
No hesitation.
Just the cold, clinical assessment of a man who had already won and was simply surveying his spoils. Sarah followed close behind, her heels clicking against the wood floor in a rhythm that set my teeth on edge. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car, and her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail that looked like it had been professionally styled that morning.
She didn't look at me.
She looked at the room, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. "You could have at least left the curtains," she murmured, more to Mark than to me. Mark ignored her. His eyes finally landed on me, and I saw something flicker in their depths. Annoyance. Impatience. Like I was a loose end he'd forgotten to tie up. "Mom," he said, the word flat and devoid of warmth. "I didn't expect you to still be here." "Where else would I be?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "This is my house." Mark sighed, a long, theatrical exhale that made me want to slap him. "It's not your house, Mom. It's never been your house. Not really. It was Dad's trust, and now it's mine. The documents are clear. I've been over them with my attorney a dozen times." "Your attorney?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "The one Sarah's father hired for you." Sarah's eyes snapped to me, sharp and hostile. "My father has nothing to do with this. Mark is perfectly capable of handling his own affairs. He's a grown man, Eleanor. Maybe you should try treating him like one." I turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time since she'd stepped through my door. She was beautiful. I'd give her that. The kind of beautiful that came from expensive skincare and regular facials and a personal trainer. But there was a hardness in her eyes that I'd always sensed but never fully acknowledged. A ruthlessness that matched Mark's, that perhaps even surpassed it. "Sarah," I said, my voice soft and measured, "I've known you for 6 years. I've welcomed you into my home. I've cooked you Christmas dinners and bought you birthday presents and treated you like the daughter I never had. And this is how you repay me by standing in my empty house and telling me I have no right to be here." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to fight with you, Eleanor. We came to give you a chance. A way out. Amelia told us she offered you the retirement community. It's a good place. Safe. Comfortable. You'll have everything you need." "Everything except my dignity," I said. Mark stepped forward, his face hardening. "Mom, you're being dramatic. You're 62 years old. You don't need a 4-bedroom house. You need a manageable space, somewhere you can be taken care of. The retirement community has nurses on staff, activities, other people your age. It's a good deal." I stared at him, this stranger in my son's body. The boy I'd raised had been replaced by a man who saw me as an inconvenience, a problem to be solved, a liability to be managed. I thought about the sleepless nights I'd spent with him when he was a baby, the way I'd rocked him in my arms and whispered promises of a better life. I thought about the money I'd saved, the sacrifices I'd made, the dreams I'd put on hold, so he could have everything he wanted. And now he was offering me a retirement home like I was a stray dog he was taking to the pound. "No," I said. Mark's eyes narrowed. "No, Mom, you don't have a choice. I've already accepted an offer on the house. The closing is in 60 days. You can either sign the papers voluntarily, or we can do this the hard way. But either way, you're leaving." I felt the anger rising in my chest, a hot, primal fury that I'd been suppressing for years. "You can't do this, Mark. You can't just erase me from my own life. I raised you. I loved you. I gave you everything I had." "You gave me what you could," Mark said, his voice cold and dismissive. "But it wasn't enough. It was never enough, Mom. You think I don't remember living in this house, with its creaky floors and leaky roof? You think I don't remember the hand-me-down clothes and the ramen noodles for dinner? Dad gave me a chance at a better life. He planned for my future. He made sure I wouldn't end up like you."
The words hit me like a slap.
I staggered back, my hand reaching out to brace myself against the wall. "End up like me? What does that even mean?" Mark's face twisted with contempt. It means you're a failure, Mom. You had a decent job, a husband who loved you, a son who looked up to you. And you threw it all away. You spent money you didn't have. You made terrible investments. You refused to plan for the future. Dad had to clean up your messes over and over again. And now you're standing in an empty house, with nothing to your name, trying to blame me for your own mistakes. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth of what he was saying cut deeper than any lie ever could, because there was a kernel of truth in it. I had been reckless with money, impulsive, more concerned with the present than the future. I had made mistakes. But I had also loved my family with every fiber of my being. I had sacrificed, given, endured. And for that, I was being punished. Sarah stepped forward, her voice softer but no less cutting. Eleanor, we're not trying to be cruel. We're trying to help you. Mark wants to give you a fresh start, a chance to rebuild your life.
But you have to let go of the past.
You have to stop clinging to things that are already gone. I looked at her, this woman who was about to become my daughter-in-law, and I saw the truth written on her face. She didn't hate me. She didn't even dislike me. She simply didn't care. I was an obstacle, a hurdle to be cleared on her way to the life she'd always wanted. And she would say whatever it took to get rid of me. I'm not signing anything, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I'm not leaving this house. Not until I've talked to my son.
Really talk to him.
Not until I understand why he would do this to me. Mark's face flushed with anger. You want to talk? Fine. Let's talk. You want to know why I'm doing this? Because Dad asked me to. He made me promise, on his deathbed, that I would take care of you. That I would make sure you didn't destroy yourself. And this is how I'm doing it. By forcing you to face reality. His voice cracked, just slightly, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something else beneath the anger. Pain, maybe. Grief. A deep, buried wound that had never fully healed. Dad didn't trust you, Mark continued, his voice growing louder. He loved you, but he didn't trust you. He saw what you were doing to yourself, to our family. He tried to stop you, but you wouldn't listen.
So he made a plan.
A plan to protect me. To protect his legacy. And I'm going to honor that plan, whether you like it or not. I felt the tears coming, hot and unstoppable. But I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not in front of Sarah. I had been weak for too long. I had let them walk all over me, dismiss me, treat me like I didn't matter. And I was done. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Mark? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I see a little boy who used to run into my arms after a nightmare. I see a teenager who couldn't sleep the night before his first big exam because he was so scared of failing. I see a young man who called me in tears when his first girlfriend broke up with him. I see my son, the son I raised, the son I loved, and I don't recognize you anymore. Mark's face went pale. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the boy I remembered, the boy I'd raised. Then the mask slammed back into place, hard and cold and impenetrable. You're trying to guilt me, he said. It's not going to work. I'm not trying to guilt you, I said. I'm trying to reach you, to remind you of who you used to be, to make you see that this isn't who you want to become. Mark shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You don't know who I want to become, Mom. You never did. You were so busy living in the past that you never bothered to see the man I was becoming. And now you're surprised that I'm not the little boy you remember. That's on you, not on me. Sarah placed a hand on Mark's arm, a gesture that was meant to be soothing but looked more possessive than anything else. Mark, we should go. This isn't productive. She's not going to listen. Mark nodded, his jaw tight.
Fine.
But I'm giving you 1 week, Mom. 1 week to pack your things and leave. If you're not out by then, I'll have the sheriff remove you. And I'll make sure you don't get a penny from the sale of this house. He turned to leave, Sarah's hand still on his arm. I watched them walk toward the door, their silhouettes framed against the gray light outside. And I felt something inside me shift. Something break. Something heal. Mark, I called out, my voice steady and clear. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn around. I loved your father, I said. I loved him with everything I had. And I know, in my heart, that he loved me too. Whatever he did, whatever he planned, it came from a place of fear. Fear of losing me, fear of losing you, fear of the future.
He was a good man, Mark.
He was a good husband, and I refuse to let you turn him into a villain in my story. Mark's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't respond. He opened the door and walked out, Sarah following close behind. The door clicked shut, and I was alone again. I stood in the empty living room, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The silence was oppressive, but it was also liberating. For the first time in days, I felt something other than grief. I felt resolved. I walked to the kitchen, found the lockbox, and pulled out the attorney's number that Margaret had sent me. I dialed, my fingers steady, law offices of Elena Vasquez. A voice answered. "How can I help you?" "Hello," I said. "My name is Eleanor Morgan. I need your help, and I need it fast." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice came back, sharp and efficient. "Tell me what happened, Mrs. Morgan. And don't leave anything out." I talked. For an hour I talked. I told her about Richard, about Mark, about the trust, about the eviction notice. I told her about Amelia and Sarah and the retirement community. I told her about the letter I'd found, the hidden lockbox, the medical records. That when I was finished, there was another long pause. Then Elena Vasquez spoke, her voice cold and determined. "Mrs. Morgan, you have a case. A strong one. Your husband's actions could constitute fraudulent concealment. The trust may be challengeable if we can prove he acted in bad faith or without proper disclosure. I'm going to need to see all the documents you've found. And I'm going to need to speak to your son." "He won't want to talk to you," I said. "He thinks he's already won." Elena laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Good. Let him think that. It'll make it easier to catch him off guard. Give me 48 hours to review what you have. In the meantime, don't sign anything. Don't talk to anyone. And whatever you do, don't leave that house. Not until I give you the go-ahead." I agreed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. I hung up the phone and sat back on the floor, my eyes scanning the empty room. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the bare walls. I thought about Mark, about the boy he used to be. I thought about Richard, the man I'd loved and lost. I thought about Amelia, Sarah, all the people who'd betrayed me, and I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. That the first step was staying in the house. The second step was talking to Elena. The third step, I didn't know yet, but I'd figure it out. One step at a time, I reached into the lockbox and pulled out a small photograph I'd kept hidden there. It was a picture of Mark on his 8th birthday, his face covered in cake, his eyes bright with joy. I stared at it for a long time, my tears finally falling. "I'm sorry, Mark," I whispered. "I'm sorry for whatever I did to make you feel like you had to do this. But I'm not going to give up on you. Not yet. Not ever." I tucked the photograph back into the lockbox and closed the lid. Then I got to my feet, brushed off my jeans, and walked to the window. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, my son was planning his wedding. My sister-in-law was gloating over her victory. My late husband's legacy was being rewritten. But here, in this empty house, I was still standing. And I was just getting started. 48 hours. That was all Elena Vasquez had asked for. 48 hours of silence, of waiting, of holding my ground in a house that felt less like a home with every passing minute. I spent the first night on the floor of the living room, wrapped in the same thin blanket from my car, staring at the shadows that crept across the ceiling. The house made sounds I'd never noticed before, the groan of settling wood, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the windows, the distant hum of the city that seemed so far away now. I thought about Mark, about the way he'd looked at me, his eyes filled with a cold, calculated anger that I'd never seen before. I thought about Sarah, her perfect ponytail and her perfect suit and her perfect, dismissive smile. I thought about Amelia, the way she'd delivered her news like she was reading a weather report. And I thought about Richard, the man I'd loved, The man who'd betrayed me from beyond the grave. By the second morning, I was running on fumes. I hadn't eaten anything since the gas station sandwich I'd grabbed before the clinic. I hadn't showered. I hadn't slept more than a few hours. But I was still standing. Still fighting. The call came at 10:47 a.m., just as the sun was starting to warm the empty rooms. Elena Vasquez's voice was brisk, businesslike, but there was an undercurrent of excitement that I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Morgan, I've reviewed everything you sent me. The medical records, the trust documents, the letter from your husband. I have good news and bad news. Which do you want first?" I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. The bad news. The trust is legally valid. Richard had the right to create it, and he did so within the bounds of the law. There's no question about that. I felt my stomach drop. "Then what's the good news?" "The good news," Elena said, her voice sharpening, "is that your husband's actions constitute what's called fraudulent concealment. He created this trust without your knowledge, without your consent, and he actively misled you about the nature of your ownership of the property. That's not just unethical. It's illegal." I blinked, my mind struggling to process the words. "So, I can fight this, you can fight it," Elena confirmed. "But it's going to be messy. Your son and his attorney will argue that Richard had the right to do whatever he wanted with his assets. They'll paint you as a reckless spendthrift, a woman who couldn't be trusted with her own inheritance. They'll bring up every mistake you've ever made, every financial misstep, every moment of weakness. And they'll use it to destroy you." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I thought about Mark's contemptuous words, about the way he dismissed me as a failure. I thought about Richard's letter, the way he described me as reckless and sentimental. They'd already built their case against me. They'd been building it for years, but I was done running, done hiding, done being the victim of my own life. "Let them try," I said, my voice steady. "I've got nothing to lose. They've already taken everything else." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, a sharp, approving sound. "That's what I like to hear. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file a motion to contest the trust. It's a long shot, but it'll buy us time. It'll force Mark and his attorney to respond, to show their hand. And while they're busy defending themselves, we're going to dig deeper." "Deeper into what?" I asked. "Your husband's medical records," Elena said. "You mentioned he was seeing an oncologist. I want to talk to that doctor. I want to know if Richard was of sound mind when he created this trust. I want to know if he was being coerced, manipulated, or pressured by anyone. Your sister-in-law, for example. Or your son." The thought sent a chill down my spine. "You think they were involved?" "I don't know," Elena admitted. "But I have a suspicion. Amelia showed up at your house with the trust documents the same day you were evicted. That's not a coincidence. She knew what was happening. She was part of it. And I want to know exactly how big a part." I agreed, my mind racing. Elena promised to call back in a few hours with an update. I hung up the phone and sat in the empty living room, the silence pressing in on me. That's when I heard the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. I rose to my feet, my body aching from a night on the hard floor. I walked to the door and opened it, my heart pounding. Margaret stood on the doorstep, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a determined expression on her face. She was older than me, by 4 years, but she had the energy of a woman half her age. Her hair was streaked with gray, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her jeans were worn, her jacket patched. She looked like she'd driven through the night to get here. "Figured you could use some company," she said, pushing past me into the house. She looked around at the empty rooms, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Holy hell, Eleanor. He really cleaned you out." I closed the door behind her, the tears finally spilling over. "Margaret, I don't know what to do. They've taken everything. Richard, Mark, Amelia, they all betrayed me. I don't even know who I can trust anymore." Margaret dropped her duffel bag on the floor and pulled me into a fierce hug. She smelled like coffee and road dust, and I buried my face in her shoulder and sobbed. "Listen to me," she said, her voice rough and steady. "You can trust me. You can always trust me. And I'm going to help you fight these bastards. every step of the way. We spent the rest of the day going through the documents Elena had asked me to gather. Margaret was a bulldog, methodical and relentless. She read through Richard's medical records with a critical eye, circling dates and highlighting passages. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a note from Richard's oncologist. 6 months before he died, he was in the hospital for a week. But according to your own memory, he was at home. He told you he was at a business conference. I frowned, trying to remember. He did go to a conference. He was gone for 6 days. He called me every night, said he missed me. Margaret shook her head. He wasn't at a conference, Eleanor. He was here, in this city, at St. Luke's Hospital. And look who signed him in. She pointed to a signature on the admission form. Amelia, your sister-in-law, was with him. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. Richard had been hospitalized, and he'd told me he was at a conference. Amelia had been with him, and she'd never said a word. They'd conspired to keep me in the dark, to make me the last to know. Why would he do that? I whispered. Why would he hide something like that from me? Because he was planning something, Margaret said, her voice grim. He was setting up the trust, and he didn't want you to know about it. He didn't want you to have a chance to stop him. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Richard's secrecy, Amelia's involvement, Mark's cold determination. They'd been working together for years, building a case against me, preparing for the moment when they'd finally cut me out of the picture. We need to get a copy of the full hospital records, Margaret said. Not just the admission forms. We need to know what they talked about, what he told the doctors who visited him. I have a friend who works in medical records at St. Luke's. She owes me a favor. I nodded, my hands trembling.
Do it.
Whatever it takes. Margaret made the call, her voice low and urgent. She spoke for 10 minutes, then hung up with a grim smile. She's going to pull the records, but it'll take a few days. In the meantime, we need to focus on what we can control. What's that? I asked. Margaret's eyes met mine, hard and unyielding. We need to talk to Mark, face to face.
No Sara, no Amélia, no attorneys.
Just you and your son. It's time to stop letting him hide behind the law and start making him answer for what he's done. The thought made my stomach churn. I tried to talk to Mark, and he dismissed me, belittled me, walked away. But Margaret was right. If I was going to fight this, I had to start with him. I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice cold and clipped. Mom, I told you I'd give you a week. If you're calling to argue, I'm not arguing, I said, cutting him off.
I'm asking. Please, Mark.
Just give me 1 hour. 1 hour to talk, just the two of us. No lawyers, no Sarah, no Amelia. Just us. I deserve that much, don't I? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him weighing the options, calculating the risks. Then finally he spoke. Fine. I'll come over tonight. But I'm bringing my attorney. If you want to talk, we do it with witnesses present. Your attorney isn't family, Mark, I said, my voice breaking. I'm your mother, the woman who raised you. And I'm asking you, as your mother, to give me 1 hour of your time. Just 1 hour. Please. Another pause. Then, softer this time. I'll come alone. But you only get an hour. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding. Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. You did good, she said. Now, we just have to figure out what to say to him. We spent the next few hours planning. Margaret suggested a direct approach, a confrontation that would force Mark to confront the truth of what he'd done. I suggested something softer, a plea from the heart. In the end, we compromised on a strategy that combined both. When the sun started to set, I changed into the cleanest clothes I could find, a pair of jeans and a sweater from Margaret's duffel bag. I brushed my hair and splashed water on my face. I wanted to look strong. I wanted to look like a woman who wasn't about to be broken. The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock. I opened the door to find Mark standing alone, his face pale and drawn. He was wearing a dark suit, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired, For the first time in days, he looked like the son I remembered. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "Hi, honey," I said.
Come in.
He stepped through the doorway, his eyes scanning the empty room. Margaret was waiting in the kitchen, out of sight, but ready to intervene if needed. Mark didn't seem to notice her presence. He was too focused on me. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I know you didn't have to." Mark shrugged, his hands shoved into his pockets. "You said you wanted to talk. So talk." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mark, I know you think I'm a failure. I know you and your father thought I was reckless, irresponsible, incapable of managing my own life. And maybe you're right. Maybe I made mistakes. Maybe I wasn't always the mother you deserved. But I loved you. I loved you more than anything in the world. And I can't believe that love means nothing to you." Mark's jaw tightened. "It doesn't mean nothing, Mom. But love isn't enough. It's never been enough. I need a future. I need stability. I need to know that I'm not going to end up like you, broke and alone and clinging to a past that's already gone." "Then why don't you let me help you?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why don't you let me be a part of your future instead of pushing me away, instead of erasing me from your life?" Mark shook his head, his eyes glistening. "Because you can't help me, Mom. You never could. Dad knew that. He set up the trust so I wouldn't have to rely on you. He set it up so I'd have a chance." "And you think that's what he wanted?" I asked. "You think he wanted you to destroy me, to leave me with nothing?" Mark's face contorted with pain. "He wanted me to survive, Mom. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." I reached out, my hand brushing his arm. "Then let me survive with you. Let me be a part of your life. I don't need the house, Mark. I don't need the money. I just need my son. I just need you." Mark stared at me, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, I saw a crack in his armor, a flicker of the boy I'd raised. Then the mask slammed back into place, hard and cold. "I can't do that, Mom," he said, pulling away. "I can't go back. Sarah needs me. My career needs me. I have a whole life ahead of me, and I can't let you drag me down with your guilt and your sorrow and your endless, suffocating need." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, my hand clutching my chest. "Mark, please," I whispered. "Please don't do this." "Goodbye, Mom," he said, turning toward the door. "I hope you find peace. I really do." He walked out, leaving me alone in the empty room. I sank to the floor, the tears finally spilling over. Margaret rushed out of the kitchen, wrapping her arms around me. "He'll come around," she said, her voice fierce. "He has to." I shook my head, my vision blurry. "No, Margaret. He won't.
He's gone."
My son is gone." Margaret held me tighter, her own tears streaming down her face. "Then we'll make him pay," she said. "Every single one of them. Starting with Amelia. And that lawyer of hers." I looked up, my eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "What do you mean?" Margaret pulled out her phone, a grim smile on her face. "My friend at St. Luke's just sent me the hospital records. And guess who visited Richard 3 times during his stay? Amelia. And guess what they talked about? The trust." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "What did they say?" Margaret's smile widened. "Enough to put her in jail for perjury. Let's go to the police station. We've got a case." The words sent a shiver down my spine.
A case.
A real case. A chance to fight back. That I rose to my feet, my legs trembling. "Let's go." We walked out of the empty house together, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The future was uncertain, the battle far from over. But for the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed with the same hollow hum as the clinic waiting room, but this time I wasn't a patient waiting for bad news. I was a woman bringing my own brand of fire. Margaret held my arm as we walked through the double doors, her grip firm enough to remind me I wasn't alone but loose enough to let me lead. I had to lead. For the first time in this nightmare, I had to be the one in front. The officer at the front desk was young, with a buzz cut and the kind of bored expression that said he'd seen everything and cared about none of it. He looked up as we approached, his eyes flicking over me with the quick, dismissive assessment I'd grown used to. Just another middle-aged woman with a problem she couldn't solve. I need to file a report, I said, my voice steadier than I expected.
Fraud.
Conspiracy. Theft. The officer raised an eyebrow. That's a heavy list, ma'am. You want to sit down and tell me what happened? We sat in a small, windowless room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. The officer, whose nameplate read Officer Daniels, pulled out a notepad and pen. Margaret sat next to me, her knee pressed against mine, a silent anchor. It's about my son, I began, and my sister-in-law, and my late husband's estate. I told him everything. The clinic, the text, the empty house, the trust, the letter, Amelia's visit, the hospital records. I didn't leave anything out, not even the parts that made me look foolish or naive. I was done hiding, done pretending I hadn't been played for a fool. Officer Daniels listened without interrupting, his pen moving across the page in neat, precise strokes. When I finished, he set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. That's a lot to unpack, ma'am. But you're saying your sister-in-law forged documents, or conspired with your son to defraud you. It's not just about the house. Margaret cut in, her voice sharp. My sister was kept from her husband's hospitalization. She was deliberately excluded from medical decisions. And Amelia was there, actively participating in the deception. That's not just a family dispute. That's elder abuse. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and potent. I'd never thought of it that way. But Margaret was right. Richard was sick. He was vulnerable. And Amelia had exploited that vulnerability to further her own agenda. Officer Daniels scratched his chin. Do you have any proof documents, recordings, anything? I pulled the hospital records from my bag, the pages Margaret's friend had sent over. These show Amelia visited Richard 3 times during his stay. She signed him in. She spoke to his doctors. And, according to these notes, she was the one who initiated the conversation about protecting his assets from me. I also handed over Richard's letter, the one he'd written to me. This is his handwriting. He was clearly under some kind of pressure when he wrote it. He says he was trying to protect Mark. But he also says he didn't trust me. That doesn't sound like a man acting of his own free will. That sounds like a man being manipulated. Officer Daniels examined the documents, his expression unreadable. I'll need to take these for analysis. And I'll need to speak with your son and your sister-in-law. If what you're saying is true, there might be grounds for a criminal investigation. My heart raced. What about the house? Can I get it back? The officer's expression softened, just slightly. That's a civil matter, ma'am. You'll need a lawyer for that. But if we find evidence of fraud or coercion, it could help your case. We left the station an hour later, the sky dark and heavy with clouds. Margaret drove us back to the empty house, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. You did good, she said. That officer took you seriously. That's more than most people get. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He took me seriously because I had proof. Before that, I was just a hysterical old woman. A liability. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. You're not a liability, Eleanor. You're a force of nature. And those bastards have no idea what's coming. The house was dark when we pulled into the driveway. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed a small envelope wedged between the frame and the door jamb. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, plain white, no return address. The message was typed, cold and impersonal. Asterisk. Drop the investigation. Or we release everything.
The debts.
The bankruptcy. The psychiatric hold. Your choice. Asterisk. I stared at the words, my blood running cold. Psychiatric hold. They were threatening to expose something I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it myself. A time years ago when I'd hit rock bottom. When Richard had had me committed for 72 hours after a nervous breakdown. I'd been grieving my mother's death, unable to function, barely able to get out of bed. Richard had made the call. He'd said it was for my own good. And maybe it was. But it was also a weapon they could use against me now. Eleanor, Margaret's voice was sharp. What is it? I handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her face going pale. Then her eyes hardened. Psychiatric hold. They're threatening to smear you, to make you look crazy. It's true, I whispered. It happened. Years ago. I had a breakdown. Richard had me committed. Margaret grabbed my shoulders, her grip fierce. Listen to me. That doesn't make you crazy. That makes you human. You were grieving. You were overwhelmed. And they're using it to try and break you. But it's not going to work.
Do you hear me?
It's not going to work. I nodded, but the words echoed in my head, taunting me. Psychiatric hold.
Debts.
Bankruptcy. They had a file on me. A dossier of my worst moments. And they were ready to release it if I didn't back down. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the floor in Margaret's borrowed sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling. The house groaned around me, the sound of a dying old woman. I thought about Richard, about the way he'd held my hand through the worst of my breakdown. I thought about Mark, about the way he'd visited me in the hospital, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. I thought about Amelia, about the way she'd smiled when she'd handed me the retirement home card. And I thought about the letter, the threat, the promise of destruction. The next morning, I called Elena Vasquez. I read her the letter over the phone, my voice shaking. This is a threat, Elena said, her voice cold. And it's a confession. They're scared, Eleanor. They know you're onto something, and they're trying to scare you off. What do? I asked. You do exactly what you've been doing, Elena said. You don't back down. You don't fold. You bring me that letter, and I'll add it to the case file. And I'll file a motion to compel Mark to produce all communications related to the trust. If they're willing to send threatening letters, they're willing to cover their tracks. And that's exactly what we're going to expose. I agreed, my resolve hardening. I'd been threatened before. I'd been beaten down, dismissed, erased. But I was still standing. And I was still fighting. That afternoon, Elena called me with news. She'd filed the motion. She'd also reached out to the hospital to request a full accounting of Amelia's visits to Richard. And she'd spoken to the doctor who'd treated Richard in his final months. The doctor is willing to testify, Elena said. He says he remembers Amelia being unusually involved in Richard's care. She asked a lot of questions about his condition, his prognosis, his mental state. And she pushed for the creation of a trust, specifically one that would exclude you. I felt a surge of anger, hot and pure. She was planning this from the very beginning. Elena agreed. And she made a mistake. She left a paper trail. And now we're going to use it to destroy her credibility. The next few days were a blur of activity. Margaret and I sorted through documents, organized evidence, prepared for the legal battle ahead. I called Mark twice, but he didn't answer. I left voicemails, pleading with him to talk to me, to tell me his side of the story. He never called back. And then on the 5th day, something happened. A letter arrived, not by mail but by courier. It was from Mark's attorney, a sleek, expensive envelope with a return address that screamed money. I opened it with trembling hands, Margaret hovering over my shoulder. Inside was a settlement offer. Mark Morgan offers to withdraw the eviction notice and allow Eleanor Morgan to remain in the house for a period of 6 months in exchange for her signed agreement to dismiss all legal claims and refrain from any further contact with Mark or Sarah. 6 months. He was giving me 6 months. And in exchange, I had to disappear from his life forever. Margaret grabbed the letter and read it aloud, her voice thick with disgust. 6 months. He's trying to buy you off. He doesn't want you at the wedding. He doesn't want you in his life. And he thinks a few months in your own house is enough to make you go away. I sat down. The letter crumpled in my hand. 6 months. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was a start. I'm not going to take it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not going to let him buy me off. Not for 6 months. Not for anything. Margaret nodded, a grim smile on her face. Good. Because I have a plan. And it's a good one. I looked up at her, my heart pounding. What kind of plan? Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed a number. My friend at the hospital. She found something else. A recording. Richard's last session with his therapist. He talks about Amelia, about how she pressured him to change his will, about how she made him believe you were a threat to Mark's future. I stared at her, my mind racing. A recording. A confession. Proof that Amelia had manipulated Richard, coerced him into betraying me. Can we use it? I asked. We can use it, Margaret said. And we will. But first, we need to talk to Mark. One more time. Face to face. And we need to make him listen. I nodded, my determination renewed. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And I was ready to fight. The next morning, I drove to Mark's office. I walked through the doors of the sleek, modern building, past the receptionist who tried to stop me, past the security guard who demanded to see my ID. I walked into Mark's office without knocking, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Mark looked up from his desk, his face pale with shock. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to talk," I said, my voice steady. "And this time, you're going to listen." Sarah was in the room, sitting in a leather chair near the window. Her face twisted into a sneer. "You don't belong here, Eleanor. This is a place of business. You're not welcome." I ignored her, my eyes locked on Mark. "I know about the therapist recording. I know about Amelia's visits to the hospital. I know what she said to your father, how she manipulated him. And I have proof. Real proof. Not just documents. A recording. Your father's own voice. Confessing to everything." Mark's face went white. "What are you talking about? Your father," I said, my voice rising, "was manipulated. By Amelia. By Sarah. By you, maybe. I don't know how deep your involvement goes. But I know the truth. And the truth is, this trust was never about protecting you. It was about control. About making sure I was erased. And I'm not going to let it happen." Sarah stood up, her eyes blazing. "Get out. You have no right to be here." "I have every right," I said, my voice cold. "I'm his mother. And I'm going to fight for him. For my family. For everything they've taken from me." Mark stared at me, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger.
Shame. Guilt.
And something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know. About the recording. About Amelia. She said she was helping me. She said she was protecting me from you." "Protecting you from what?" I asked, my voice breaking. "From love from a mother who would do anything for you." Mark looked away, his jaw tight. "I need time to think." "You don't have time," I said. "The wedding is in 3 months. The house is sold. You've already started a war you can't win. But I'm giving you a chance, Mark. One last chance. Walk away from this. Walk away from Amelia and Sarah and everyone else who's been manipulating you.
Come back to me.
Come back to your family." Mark's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the boy I'd raised. The boy who'd held my hand when he was scared. The boy who told me he loved me more than anything in the world. Then Sarah stepped in front of him, her voice sharp and commanding. "Mark, don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you. She's trying to ruin your future." Mark looked at Sarah, then back at me. His face hardened. "I'll talk to you later, Mom," he said, his voice cold. "But right now, I need you to leave." I stared at him, my heart shattering all over again. I had come so close to reaching him. And now he was pulling away, retreating behind the walls Sarah and Amelia had built around him. But I wasn't done fighting. "Not yet. I'll be waiting," I said, turning toward the door. "When you're ready to talk, I'll be there." I walked out of the office, my head held high, my heart in pieces. But as I stepped into the elevator, I felt a spark of hope. A small, fragile flame that refused to die. That I had proof. I had a lawyer. I had my sister. And I had the truth. And sooner or later, the truth would set me free. That I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the empty living room with Margaret, the recording of Richard's therapy session playing over and over on her laptop. His voice was thin, reedy, the voice of a man who knew he was dying and was desperately trying to control the narrative of his own life. "She's persistent," Richard said on the recording, his voice cracking. "Amelia. She keeps telling me Eleanor is going to destroy everything. That she'll spend Mark's inheritance. That she'll leave him with nothing. And I believe her. I have to believe her. Because if I don't, then I'm just a man who's dying, and I can't live with that. I need to leave something behind. Something that matters. I listened to it a dozen times, searching for any hint of coercion, any sign that Richard was being manipulated. But his voice was steady, almost calm. He believed what he was saying. He really thought I was a threat to Mark's future. The therapist is willing to testify, Margaret said, her voice grim. She says Richard was under a lot of stress. He was afraid. And Amelia was feeding that fear. She was telling him stories about you, about your spending habits, about your mental health. She was painting a picture of a woman who couldn't be trusted. Because she wanted the house, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She wanted the house. Not for Mark. For herself. She wanted to sell it to a developer. She probably had a deal lined up before Richard even died. Margaret nodded, her jaw tight. That's exactly what I was thinking. And now we have proof. Amelia's been manipulating everyone from the very beginning. Mark, Richard, even Sarah. She's been playing them like puppets. I felt a surge of anger, hot and pure. Amelia had been pulling the strings all along. She'd poisoned Richard against me. She'd manipulated Mark into betraying me. And she'd done it all for money. For a piece of a house she had no right to. We need to tell Mark, I said. He needs to know what she's done. Margaret shook her head. He won't believe you. He's too deep in her web. We need to confront Amelia first. Make her confess. Or at least make her slip up. The plan formed slowly, piece by piece. We would call Amelia to the house, under the pretense of accepting her offer. We would record the conversation, catch her in a lie, force her to admit her involvement. It was risky, dangerous. But it was the only shot we had. The next morning, I called Amelia. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and polished. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. Have you reconsidered the retirement community? I have, I said, my voice flat. I want to take you up on your offer. But I have some questions first. Can you come over? There was a pause, a moment of calculation. Then, of course, I'll be there in an hour. I hung up, my heart pounding. Margaret set up the recording equipment, hidden in a small lamp on the floor. We were readied. Amelia arrived exactly on time, looking as polished as ever. Her cream-colored suit was pressed, her hair perfectly coiffed. She smiled as she stepped through the door, her eyes scanning the empty room with barely concealed satisfaction. This is for the best, Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy.
You'll see.
The retirement community is lovely. You'll make friends, find new hobbies, start a new chapter. I gestured for her to sit on the floor, the only place we had to sit. She hesitated, then lowered herself gracefully, crossing her legs at the ankle. Before I agree to anything, I said, I need to ask you a few questions. About Richard. About the trust. Amelia's smile faltered. What about them? I pulled out the hospital records, the therapist's notes, the recording. I know you visited Richard in the hospital. I know you talked to his therapist. I know you pressured him to create the trust. And I have proof. Amelia's face went pale, but her voice was still steady. I don't know what you're talking about. I visited my brother because he was dying. I wanted to support him. There was nothing nefarious about it. Then why did you tell him I couldn't be trusted? I demanded. Why did you tell him I was going to destroy Mark's future? Why did you manipulate him into cutting me out of his will? Amelia's eyes narrowed. Because it was true. You were a liability, Eleanor. You always have been. Richard knew it. Mark knows it. And now the rest of the world is going to know it too. Margaret stepped out of the kitchen, her phone held high. Got it, she said, her voice cold. You just admitted to manipulating Richard. On tape. Amelia stared at her, her face going white. That's not, I didn't, you did. I said, my voice steady. And I'm going to use it. I'm going to take it to the police. I'm going to take it to the press. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. Amelia stood up, her composure crumbling. You're making a mistake. If you release that recording, I'll destroy you. I'll expose everything. The debts. The bankruptcy. The psychiatric hold. I don't care, I said, my voice rising. I don't care anymore. You've taken everything from me. My house, my son, my husband's memory. I have nothing left to lose. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She stood there, trembling, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. You think you're going to win, she finally said, her voice bitter. You're a fool, Eleanor. A sentimental, pathetic fool. Mark will never forgive you. Sarah will never let him. And the house is already sold. There's nothing you can do. I stood my ground, my heart pounding. We'll see. Amelia stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood in the empty room, my legs shaking, my hands trembling. Margaret rushed over, wrapping her arms around me. You did it, she said, her voice fierce. You broke her. I shook my head. She's not broken. She's just scared. And scared people do dangerous things. We spent the rest of the day preparing for the fallout. Elena Vasquez was ecstatic about the recording. This is a game changer, she said over the phone. We can use this to challenge the trust, to expose Amelia's manipulation, to force Mark to see the truth. But we need to be careful. Amelia has resources. She'll fight back. We're ready, I said. We've already seen the worst she can do. But I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. That night, I received another letter. This one was delivered by hand, tucked under the front door. Inside was a single, damning document. A copy of my psychiatric hold from years ago, complete with a note from Richard, written in his own handwriting. My wife is a danger to herself and others. She cannot be trusted to manage her own affairs. And beneath it, a typed message. You've made a mistake, Eleanor. We've got the means to destroy you. Drop the case. Or we release this to every news outlet in the city. I stared at the document, my hands shaking. My worst fears realized. They were going to use my breakdown against me. They were going to paint me as crazy, unreliable, a threat to my own family. Margaret looked over my shoulder, her face pale. They're trying to break you. Don't let them. I nodded, but the tears were already streaming down my face. They have everything, Margaret. My own husband said I was a danger to myself. How can I fight that? Margaret grabbed my shoulders, her grip fierce. You fight it because you're not a danger. You were grieving. You were overwhelmed. And Richard was wrong. He was wrong to do that to you, and he was wrong to use it against you. You're not crazy. You are not broken. And you are not giving up. I looked at her, my vision blurry. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, she said. You've already done the hardest part. You faced Amelia. You recorded her confession. And now you're going to face Mark. One more time. I shook my head. He won't listen. He's made up his mind. Then make him listen, Margaret said. Show him the recording. Show him the letter. Show him what Amelia's been doing. And if he still won't listen, then you walk away. But at least you'll know you tried. I spent the night thinking about what Margaret had said. About Mark, about Amelia, about Richard. About all the moments I'd let them push me down. All the times I'd let them make me feel small. By morning, my resolve was stronger than ever. I drove to Mark's office, the recording and the letters in my bag. I walked past the receptionist and the security guard, my heart pounding. And I walked into Mark's office without knocking. Mark was alone this time. He looked up, his face pale and drawn. Mom, I told you. I know what you told me, I said, cutting him off. But I'm not leaving until you hear me out. And if you still want me to go after that, I will. But you're going to hear the truth first. I played the recording. Richard's voice filled the room, thin and desperate. Then Amelia's, cold and calculating. Mark listened, his face growing paler with each passing second. When the recording ended, I handed him the letter Amelia had sent. She threatened me. She said she'd release my psychiatric records if I didn't drop the case. She's been manipulating all of us, Mark. She's been using us for years. Mark stared at the letter, his hands shaking. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know she was doing this. Now you do, I said. And you have a choice. You can keep fighting me. Keep letting her control your life.
Or you can walk away.
Walk away from her. From Sarah. From all of it. And come back to your family. Mark looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can, Mom. I've done terrible things. I've hurt you. I've hurt everyone. I know, I said, my voice soft. But it's never too late to make it right. You just have to try. Mark stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, his jaw tight. I'm going to end this. All of it. The wedding. The trust. Everything. I'm going to tell Sarah and Amelia that I'm done. I reached out and took his hand. I'm proud of you, Mark. And I love you. No matter what happens. Mark squeezed my hand, his tears finally spilling over. I love you too, Mom.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. We sat in his office, holding hands, crying together. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't an end to the pain. But it was a start. A beginning. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had my son back, but I knew, deep down, that the battle wasn't over. Amelia wasn't going to give up without a fight. And Sarah, with her sharp tongue and cold eyes, wasn't going to let Mark go without a struggle. The storm was still coming. But this time, I wasn't standing alone. I had Mark. I had Margaret. I had Elena. And I had the truth. And together we were going to fight. Mark didn't call Sarah. He didn't call Amelia either. He just sat in his office, holding the letter I'd given him, staring at it like it was a bomb about to detonate. I watched him, my heart aching for the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. The weight of his choices was etched into every line of his face. I need to do this myself, he said finally, his voice rough. I need to face them. All of them. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to do it alone. But I knew that was a lie. He'd made this bed. He needed to be the one to tear it apart. Call me when it's done, I said. No matter what happens. Call me. Mark nodded, his eyes still fixed on the letter. I squeezed his hand and walked out of his office, my legs trembling. The receptionist glared at me as I passed, but I didn't care. I had my son back. Everything else was just noise. Margaret was waiting in the car. She took one look at my face and knew. He's going to do it. He's going to end it. I nodded, the tears spilling over. He's going to try. We drove back to the house in silence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty rooms. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and waited. The minutes crawled by like hours. My phone stayed silent. At 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark, *, I did it. It's over. I'll come by tomorrow. We need to talk. I read the words over and over, searching for any hint of hesitation. There was none. Just a cold, final declaration. My son had ended his engagement. He'd chosen me. Margaret grabbed the phone from my hands and read the message. Her face broke into a wide, triumphant smile. He did it. The boy actually did it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was just beginning. Sarah and Amelia weren't the kind of women who took defeat lying down. They would retaliate. They would fight. And Mark, still raw from the breakup, would be vulnerable. I was right. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Mark, his voice panicked and rawed. Mom, Sarah showed up at my apartment. She says she's pregnant. She's threatening to go to the press, to tell everyone I abandoned her and the baby. She says if I don't get back together with her and go through with the wedding, she'll destroy me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Pregnant. Sarah was pregnant. And she was using it as a weapon. Mom, what do I do? Mark's voice cracked. I can't go back to her. But I can't abandon my own child. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We need to talk to a lawyer, Mark. A family lawyer. We need to know what your rights are. And we need to know if Sarah is telling the truth. I don't know if she's telling the truth, Mark said. She could be lying. She could be trying to trap me. But what if she's not? What if she's actually pregnant? Then we'll deal with it, I said. We'll do the right thing. But we're not going to let her manipulate you. Not anymore. I hung up and called Elena. She listened to the whole story, her silence heavy with judgment. Mrs. Morgan, This complicates things, she said. If Sarah is pregnant, Mark has a responsibility. But she's also using the pregnancy as leverage. That's coercion. It's abuse. And it's something we can use against her in court. I don't want to fight her, I said. I want to help her. If she's actually pregnant, she needs support, not a legal battle. That's very noble of you, Mrs. Morgan, Elena said. But Sarah isn't playing by the same rules. She's already started a war. And we need to be ready to fight back. I agreed, my heart heavy. I'd wanted a peaceful resolution. I'd wanted to rebuild my family. But Sarah and Amelia had other plans. And now I had to protect my son, even if it meant going to war that afternoon. Mark came to the house. He looked broken, his eyes red-rimmed, his suit rumpled. He sank onto the floor next to me, his head in his hands. I didn't want this, Mom. I didn't want any of it. I just wanted a normal life.
A wife.
A family. A future. And now everything's falling apart. I wrapped my arm around him, pulling him close. I know, honey. I know. But we're going to get through this. Together. We spent the rest of the day planning. Elena called with a recommendation for a family lawyer, a woman named Diane who specialized in custody cases and coercive control. Diane was sharp, ruthless, and she had a reputation for winning against impossible odds. She's perfect, Elena said. She'll take Sarah part. But you need to be prepared, Mark. This is going to get ugly. Sarah and Amelia are going to fight dirty. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. I'm ready. I've already lost everything that matters. I'm not going to lose my mother again. I felt a surge of love for my son, a fierce, protective instinct that I thought I'd lost. He was back, my real son, and I was going to fight for him. The next few days were a blur of legal documents and strategy sessions. Diane was as ruthless as Elena had promised. She filed a motion to compel Sarah to submit to a paternity test to prove she was actually pregnant. She filed a restraining order against Amelia, citing the threatening letters and the recording. And she filed a counterclaim against the trust, citing fraud and undue influence. I'm throwing everything at them, Diane said over the phone. They're going to have to defend themselves on every front. And while they're busy doing that, we're going to find the truth. The first crack came 3 days later. Amelia's attorney called Diane, offering a settlement. They would drop the eviction notice. They would return the contents of the house. They would drop all claims against Mark. In exchange, Mark had to agree not to contest the trust and to drop the counterclaim. Diane presented the offer to us, her expression unreadable. It's a good offer, but it's not the full story. They're scared. They know they've been caught. And they're trying to make a deal before we expose them completely. Mark shook his head. No deals. I'm not going to let them buy me off. Not again. I agreed. We're going to see this through. All the way. Diane nodded, a cold smile on her face. That's what I was hoping you'd say. The legal battle intensified. Sarah's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the paternity test, claiming it was invasive and unnecessary. Amelia's attorney filed a motion to suppress the recording, claiming it had been obtained illegally. But Diane was relentless. She countered every motion, blocked every attempt to delay, and pushed the case forward with relentless precision. And then, the breakthrough came. Diane had hired a private investigator, a woman named Rosa, who specialized in financial crimes. Rosa had been digging into Amelia's background, her finances, her connections. And she'd found something. A series of payments from a real estate developer to a shell company owned by Amelia. Payments that coincided with the sale of the house. Amelia had a deal in place, Diane said, her voice cold with triumph. She was going to sell the house to a developer for twice its market value. And she was going to pocket the difference. The trust was just a way to get you out of the way, Mrs. Morgan. She was going to use Mark's wedding as a cover. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. Amelia had been planning this for years. She'd manipulated Richard. She'd manipulated Mark. She'd manipulated Sarah. And she'd done it all for money. We have her, Diane said. We have enough to put her in jail. But we need to decide how to use it. I looked at Mark, his face a mask of shock and anger. We use it, he said, his voice firm. We show everyone what she did. We make her pay. I nodded. My resolve hardened. We use it. All of it. The next week was a whirlwind of legal filings and public disclosures. Diane released the evidence to the court, along with a press release summarizing Amelia's crimes. The media picked it up like a hungry dog. Amelia's name was splashed across every news outlet, her face plastered on every screen. And then, the second crack came. Sarah's mother, a wealthy socialite who'd always treated me with barely concealed contempt, reached out to Diane. She was panicked. Sarah's pregnancy had been a lie. She'd never been pregnant. She'd faked the whole thing to manipulate Mark. Sarah's mother is willing to testify, Diane said, her voice barely containing her excitement. She says Sarah and Amelia concocted the whole scheme together. Sarah was in on it from the beginning. The wedding, the trust, everything. I felt a surge of cold rage. Sarah had lied. She'd used a fake pregnancy to manipulate my son. She'd been part of the conspiracy all along. I want her prosecuted, Mark said, his voice shaking with anger. I want her charged with fraud, with extortion, with everything. Diane nodded. We can do that. But first, we need to focus on the trust. If we win that case, everything else falls into place. The case went to trial a month later. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped in my lap, my heart pounding. Amelia sat across the room, her face pale and drawn. Sarah was next to her, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Mark sat next to me, his hand gripping mine. Margaret was on my other side, her jaw set in a grim line. We were ready. We had the evidence. We had the truth. And we were going to win. The trial lasted 3 days. Diane dismantled Amelia's case piece by piece, exposing every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. She played the recording. She presented the financial documents. She called witnesses, including the therapist and the hospital staff, who testified to Amelia's interference. And then the final blow. Rosa, the private investigator, took the stand. She presented evidence that Amelia had been planning to sell the house to a developer for years. That she'd manipulated Richard and Mark to get her hands on it. Is it true that you told Richard Morgan that his wife was a liability? Diane asked, her voice sharp. Amelia's face contorted with anger. I don't have to answer that. Your Honor, I'd like to remind the witness that she's under oath, Diane said, her voice cold. The judge nodded. Answer the question, Ms. Morgan. Amelia's face went white.
Yes.
I told him that. Because it was true. Did you also tell him that his wife was a danger to herself and others? Diane pressed. Yes, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. And did you tell him that to manipulate him into changing his will? Amelia was silent. Her attorney stood up, objecting to the question. But the judge overruled the objection. Answer the question, Ms. Morgan, the judge said. Amelia looked at me, her eyes filled with hatred.
Yes.
I told him that. I told him whatever I had to make sure he did the right thing. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Diane smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. No further questions, Your Honor. The verdict was handed down the next day. Amelia was found guilty of fraud and undue influence. The trust was invalidated. The house was returned to me. And Amelia's financial crimes were referred to the prosecutor's office for criminal charges. Sarah's case was dropped when her mother testified that the pregnancy had been fake. But her reputation was destroyed. She walked out of the courtroom a broken woman, her eyes hollow, her dreams shattered. Mark watched her go, his face unreadable. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Are you okay? I asked. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. I will be. It's going to take a while. But I will be. We walked out of the courtroom together, the sun shining down on us. The battle was over. We had won. But the scars would take time to heal. As we walked, I thought about Richard, about the man I'd loved and lost. I wondered if he would have been proud of me, proud of Mark. I hoped so. I looked at my son, his face pale but determined. We're going to be okay, I said. We're going to rebuild. Together. Mark nodded, a small smile on his face. Together. We walked into the future, our steps steady, our hearts full. The storm had passed. And now, at last, the sun was rising. The house looked different when I walked through the front door. Not just because the furniture was gone, not just because the walls were bare and the floor scratched. It looked different because I was different. I had walked out of that courtroom with my head held high and my son's hand in mine, and I had walked back into this empty shell of a home carrying something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope. Margaret had already started making calls. The moving truck that had taken everything was located 2 states away, its contents still intact. Amelia had been storing the furniture in a warehouse, waiting for the right moment to sell it off. The judge ordered its immediate return. Within a week, my grandmother's rooster was back on the mantel, my wedding album was back on the shelf, and my bed was back in the bedroom where Richard had died and where I had mourned him for years. But something was missing. The house was full again, but it wasn't home. Not yet. It needed something more than furniture. It needed life. Mark moved back in the day after the trial. He'd broken his lease, sold his car, and showed up on my doorstep with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. His face was drawn, his eyes hollow, but there was a flicker of something else beneath the exhaustion. Determination. I need to start over, he said, his voice rough. I need to be here. With you. I opened the door wide and pulled him into my arms. You're always welcome here, Mark. This is your home. It always has been. He stayed in his old room, the one I'd converted into a guest room after he'd moved out. I walked past it that first night and heard him crying, muffled sobs that broke my heart. I wanted to knock, to comfort him, but I knew he needed to grieve. Sarah, Amelia, the life he'd built. It was all gone. He had to let it go. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Pancakes, the way he'd loved them as a kid. He sat at the kitchen table, his fork in his hand, staring at the plate like he'd forgotten how to eat. Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know who I am anymore. I spent years trying to be someone else. Someone I thought Dad wanted me to be. And now that person is gone. I don't know what's left. I sat down across from him, reaching across the table to take his hand. What's left is you, Mark. The real you. The one who used to run into my arms after a nightmare. The one who cried when his first goldfish died. The one who used to tell me he loved me more than anything in the world. That boy is still in there. I know he is. Mark looked up at me, his eyes glistening. What if I don't know how to find him? You start by forgiving yourself, I said. For the mistakes. For the hurt. For the people you let down. And then you start building something new. Something true. He nodded, his jaw tight. I don't know if I know how to do that. Neither do I said, squeezing his hand. But we'll figure it out together. We spent the next few weeks rebuilding our lives. Mark took a leave of absence from his firm, spending his days helping me clean and organize the house. Margaret came over every afternoon, her sharp tongue and sharper wit a constant source of comfort. The 3 of us sat on the back porch, watching the sunset, talking about the past and the future. I'm not going to be a lawyer anymore, Mark announced one evening, his voice quiet but firm. I don't want to be part of that world. All that competition, all that greed. It's not who I am. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What are you going to do? Mark shrugged. I don't know. I've been thinking about teaching. High school history. I always loved that subject, and I think I'd be good at it. I felt a surge of pride, so sharp it almost hurt. My son, who had once dreamed of corner offices and 6-figure bonuses, was talking about teaching, about giving back, about making a difference. I think you'd be great at it, I said. You always had a way of explaining things. Even when you were a kid, you used to help the neighbors' kids with their homework. Mark smiled, a genuine smile, the first I'd seen in weeks. Yeah, I remember that. Mrs. Patterson used to pay me in cookies. We all laughed, a warm, easy sound that filled the porch and drifted out into the night. It was the first time I'd laughed like that in years, and it felt like coming home. The weeks turned into months. Mark started a master's program in education at the local university. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching English to immigrants. Margaret went back to her home state, but she called every day, her voice a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. And then, one Saturday morning, Mark knocked on my bedroom door, his face pale and serious. "Mom, I need to tell you something. And I need you not to get angry." My heart clenched. "What is it?" Mark took a deep breath. I reached out to Sarah, not to get back together, but to apologize for the way I treated her, for the way I let Amelia manipulate both of us. I stared at him, my mind racing. "Why would you do that?" "Because I needed to," Mark said, his voice steady. "I was part of the problem, Mom. I let Amelia control me. I let Sarah control me. I made decisions based on fear, not love. And Sarah was just as much a victim as I was. She didn't know what Amelia was planning. She was manipulated too." I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. Sarah had faked a pregnancy. She'd threatened to destroy my son's reputation. She'd been part of the conspiracy, whether she knew it or not. "How can you forgive her?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because I've been forgiven," Mark said. "By you. By Margaret. By everyone who cared about me. And if I can't forgive her, then I'm not really free. I'm still trapped in the past." I looked at my son, this man who had once been a boy, and I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Wisdom, compassion, a depth of understanding that had been buried under years of ambition and fear. "Did she apologize?" I asked. "She did," Mark said. "She told me everything. Amelia had been manipulating her for years, telling her that I was weak, that I'd never amount to anything without her, that the only way to secure our future was to get control of the house. She said she was ashamed. She said she was sorry." I felt the anger drain out of me, replaced by something softer. Sadness, maybe. Or acceptance. Sarah had been a pawn in Amelia's game, just like the rest of us. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "I don't know. I don't want to get back together with her. That part of my life is over. But I want to help her. She's going through a lot. Her reputation is destroyed. Her family is ashamed of her. She needs someone to show her the way back." I nodded, my heart heavy. "That's a big burden to carry, Mark." "I know," he said, "but I've carried bigger burdens. And I had you to help me. Maybe she needs that too." I reached out and took his hand. "You're a good man, Mark. I'm proud of you." Mark smiled, a small, tentative smile. "I'm trying to be, Mom. I'm trying." The next few weeks were quiet. Mark continued his studies. I continued my volunteering. And slowly, gradually, the house started to feel like a home again. That one evening, Mark came home with a small box. He set it on the kitchen table, his eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in months. Excitement. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," he said. I opened the box. Inside was a key. A small, brass key, attached to a tag that read, "Asterisk for Mom." Asterisk. I looked up at him, confused. "What is it?" Mark's smile widened. "It's a key to the new place. The one I bought with the money from the trust. Well, the part of the trust that's mine now. It's a small house, just a few blocks away. I thought you might want to have a place of your own. A place where you can make new memories. But I also thought maybe you'd want to keep this one too. This house, it's your home, Mom. It always has been." I stared at the key, the tears spilling over. "You bought a house." "For me," Mark nodded. "I wanted to do something to make up for everything. I know I can't undo the past. But I can give you a future. A future where you're never alone. Where you're always loved. And where you always have a place to come home to." I pulled him into a hug, sobbing into his shoulder. "I don't deserve this, Mark. I don't deserve you." Mark held me tight, his voice soft and steady. "You deserve everything, Mom. You deserve the world. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." We stood there, holding each other, the key clutched in my hand. The house was still empty in places, still full of ghosts. But it was also full of love, full of hope, full of the future. That night, I sat on the back porch, watching the stars come out. Mark sat beside me, his arm around my shoulder. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. We were together. That was enough. That I thought about Richard, about the man I'd loved and lost. I thought about Amelia, about the woman who'd tried to destroy us. I thought about Sarah, about the girl who'd been lost and found again. I thought about Margaret, about my sister, who had never given up on me. And I thought about Mark, my son, my miracle, my reason for fighting. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I never thought we'd get here. I never thought we'd find our way back to each other. Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. Neither did I, Mom. But we did. And I'm never going to let go again. I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. The weight of the past was still there, a heavy burden I would always carry. But it was lighter now. Lighter because I wasn't carrying it alone. The house creaked around us, settling into the night. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. The stars twinkled above, cold and distant and beautiful, and in that moment, I knew everything was going to be okay. Not perfect, not easy, but okay, because I had my son, I had my home, and I had the truth that was all I ever really needed.